So straight up, I'm a big believer in the power of community. And I think especially in spaces like climate biotech, right? It's not easy. There's no silver bullet. I have a lot of respect for founders who are building in this space. And so, without these sort of predefined paths to success, with few sort of blockbusters to look up to, that journey is very, very difficult. And that's where I think collaboration becomes super important, right? There are few of us trying to solve very large scale global problems. And so it's really important for us to be able to openly share, build on each other's learnings in a way that helps us all grow together.
Hello and welcome to Anahita Speaker Series presented by Carnegie India, celebrating stirring stories of empowerment, struggle, and success from women professionals in different fields across the globe. Stories we hope are bound to inspire young professionals. I am Charukeshi Bhatt, a research assistant at Carnegie India, and today we're honored to have with us Mridu Jhangiani. Mridu Jhangiani is the founder of Terrarium, a platform dedicated to accelerating the growth of sustainable material startups through consulting, community building, and content creation. With a background in product design from the National Institute of Design, Ahmedabad, and experience as a principal at Meraki Labs, one of India's pioneering venture studios, she has a unique combination of design expertise and venture capital acumen. Her work spans across climate biotech, venture building, and sustainable innovation, where she has collaborated with startups on strategy, operations, and scaling solutions. Mridu's past projects include developing a provisional-patented sustainable packaging solution, designing systems to combat food waste, and crafting input frameworks for seed-to-scale ventures. She also shares her learnings through her blog, reflecting her commitment to connecting and inspiring others in the fields of sustainability and entrepreneurship. Mridu, we're delighted to have you in the episode. We'll just begin with your story first. You studied product design at the National Institute of Design, Ahmedabad. How did that journey begin? And what led you from being a design student to the intersection of sustainability, venture capital, and entrepreneurship?
Going to your question, I'm going to take it all the way back from when I was a child. So growing up, I was always a very curious and creative kid. I spent a lot of time, working with my hands. I loved games that involved, building toy planes or painting, for example, anything that basically got me to sit down and work with my hands and create things. So I think growing up, I always knew that a creative profession is what I would eventually choose. And so when I was in the 11th and 12th grade, I started preparing for NATA, which is the National Aptitude Test for Architecture. And along with that, I also gave the NID entrance exam. So when that worked out, my heart really wanted to go to NID, and so I chose product design and specialized in product design while I was there. The journey then from design into venture capital and then into sustainability has been an interesting one. So I moved from design into VC, realizing that often at design schools the focus is so much on design and design related processes that sometimes the business context is something that you don't fully understand. And like you pointed out, I did have a material innovation project that I received a provisional patent for and then wanted to take forward. But being a 22-year-old design student, I didn't know how to scale it beyond a prototype. And so somewhere, lacking that knowledge, lacking that business acumen, I felt like I wanted to understand what the larger context within which some of these decisions had to be made. And so I took what is more of an unconventional, nonlinear path and moved from design into venture capital. The other reason was also because while I was at NID, a lot of our work was focused on social impact. And while I was surrounded by peers who were all very exceptionally talented and, some amazing projects would come out of semester over semester, a lot of them would be left behind as classroom projects. They never saw the light of day, the impact they could potentially have. And so for me, it became really important to understand how do ideas basically become companies. And that's why I moved from design into venture capital. And I think sustainability was one of those things that was always an underlying theme through all of the work that I did. And just subconsciously, it wasn't an active decision. So one of my classroom projects was around material innovation. My thesis project was around food waste. My I then started working with a corporate in the renewable energy sector. And then, of course, Climate Designers is a community that I was trying to build over the weekends as a volunteer based out of India. And so, it was something that compounded over the years. But very recently, actually, a personal incident, my dog fell ill from a case of fertilizer poisoning. And that actually served as a turning point for me to look at sustainability and embrace it wholeheartedly. And that was also the genesis, of Terrarium as a platform and my full commitment to sustainability. But yeah, I mean, here I am today, then, drawing from all of these different experiences and trying to add value back into the ecosystem.
That is super interesting. Thank you, Mridu. We get a sense of what inspired you to move from product design and take a little bit of that to your venture capital sort of endeavor, and then also continue it in the sustainability space. So, coming to Terrarium, it's essentially a platform that accelerates commercialization of sustainable materials. I want to understand, how do you see it evolving to address the challenges faced by early age startups? Because you said you were young and you were also struggling to kind of scale it. So how do you think about that?
Yeah. So again, the genesis for Terrarium was, my own experience trying to scale a material innovation, but also I had a very rewarding few years with Meraki, where as a venture studio building it ground up and working with very early stage companies, it was a wonderful opportunity to watch other founders grow, learn, and be a part of their journeys. So I think somewhere at the intersection of sustainability, design, and also, wanting and understanding the needs of early stage founders was born Terrarium. And it really is my way of helping other material innovators. Where I was 7 years ago, there are lots of people today. And now it's definitely a much better time to be building a material company. So really, Terrarium for me is that. Long story short, the way Terrarium works, the model it's a dual model of a for-profit and a not-for-profit. So under the for-profit side, we have consulting services for startups, early stage founders, and on the non-profit side, which is actually the majority of our work, we have community and content related initiatives. And we realized that for startups, while we can help them scale and work very closely with them, the ecosystem also needs to be mature for them to be able to successfully commercialize and for there to be consumer adoption at the end of the day. So we realize that building the ecosystem is actually probably as important or even more important as a piece of work. And so, going forward, the idea definitely is that there will continue to be a large focus on ecosystem building, but we also want to go deeper into certain sectors, deeper into the expertise and complementary value that we can add, and then take a more tailored approach, right? Whether we're doing, the built environment or we're looking at textiles and then looking at solutions within that. So it's definitely, again, some sense of converging, but also some sense of diverging.
Thank you. That's a perfect segue for the next question, because from what I understand, a big part of Terrarium is fostering a community of collaborators and encouraging knowledge sharing. In your experience, how important do you think is to have a strong support network, especially for women in spaces like venture capital and sustainability that are primarily male dominated?
That's a great question. So straight up, I'm a big believer in the power of community. And I think especially in spaces like climate biotech, right? It's not easy. There's no silver bullet. I have a lot of respect for founders who are building in this space. And so, without these sort of predefined paths to success with few sort of blockbusters to look up to, that journey is very, very difficult. And that's where I think collaboration becomes super important, right? There are few of us trying to solve very large scale global problems. And so it's really important for us to be able to openly share, build on each other's learnings in a way that helps us all grow together, right? You're winning as a team. It's not like there's one startup that's going to solve all of the problems at the end of the day. And so even within Terrarium, we've curated, and nurtured two spaces that do specifically this. We have the Indo-US Founders Forum, which is specifically and exclusively for founders all over the world, right now in India and US, but with a broader vision to connect the whole world, where founders in the early stages can come, share challenges, brainstorm solutions, and maybe even share resources at the end of the day. Similarly, another initiative is the material mixers, where we have a multidisciplinary group of experts, that could be policy, academia, journalists, scientists, all coming together and talking about, okay, between our fields, where are the gaps? How can we work together to, make those collaborations more robust. And I think especially for women, right? And even more so in the deep tech or sort of academia space, what happens is it is male dominated, you're right. So there can be a strong sense of alienation that happens to you, especially if you come from a non-science background like myself. I come from design, right? And that's where I think a community of women and a strong network becomes super important, because these are women who can support each other both as friends, mentors, role models. And that I think is, just priceless, that kind of support. So, yeah, to wrap it up, I think it's absolutely important. And yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Mridu. That's a great answer. As someone who has worn multiple hats, you're a designer, you're a venture capitalist, you've been an entrepreneur. How do you see these roles complementing each other in the work that you do today? And if I can also add an extra question, who is Mridu at heart? Which of these is Mridu at heart?
I think that's a great addition to your original question. So yeah, you're right. The journey hasn't been linear, and in a lot of ways, I think there's no sort of predefined job description. You're trying to figure out where you can add value to begin with. I've had my fair shares of ups and downs as I've watched my peers sort of move on a more, from design to senior product designer to then, assistant and vice president and all of these, go higher up the ladder. So I think it's not been very easy, and I think but at the same time, it's been very, very rewarding. If I could go back, there's nothing I would change about the way that my career has progressed. And sometimes I do find myself in these unique positions, right? So, for example, one of the services that I offer startups is storytelling for deep tech. Now, the reason I feel confident about doing that is because I'm sort of drawing from my design experience, but also my VC experience. So I'm able to understand what innovators are trying to say and what investors are understanding, and oftentimes there can be a gap in that. So storytelling for deep tech becomes one area where I see opportunity from having chosen all sorts of different career paths. And the second one, I think more personally, is also just building a venture studio, right, as a part of the founding team. I think so many very, very important, valuable lessons I've learned by watching others grow in their journeys, other founders' journeys, that now today, as I'm building my platform, it's something that I've become cognizant of or actively trying to practice. Does that answer your question? I'll get to the second part.
It does. Yeah.
Okay. And the second part, I think I will, at my core, I will always be a designer, and that will be first and everything else after.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
You work with founders and professionals from a lot of diverse backgrounds. What are some strategies that you use to foster inclusivity when you're collaborating with them and also in their ecosystem?
So here I'm going to take the example of events and forums that we organize, because I think those are the best examples where multiple stakeholders are in the same room. So I have a checklist. It's 3 pretty simple things, but they seem to work well so far. The first one is to design for value creation, right? So when you design an experience, you realize that there are people coming from all walks of life with different sort of amounts of sectoral depth, different perceptions of things. And so for me, one important thing is, in the entire experience, how do you design for any one part of that experience to have super high value for a specific stakeholder? So the whole experience doesn't have to be designed for everyone, but there has to be some point when someone has really high value to derive from it. That's the one thing. The second thing is, I think, really simple. Just keep it simple. Lead by example. A lot of times, what I've noticed is, when you are someone who's facilitating and delivering a workshop, for example, sets the environment of the room in a way that allows people to be themselves, that allows people to be vulnerable, that allows people to just ask questions that you sometimes second guess. It makes people comfortable. It makes people realize it's a safe space. And so all kind of then opinions are, acknowledged and nurtured and invited. And the last one I want to say is just designing for inclusivity, right? Almost as a principle. And I think so one example of that is, we do this thing called the Materials Corner at Terrarium events, where the idea is that anyone from the curious to the committed in the sustainable material space has an opportunity to come tangibly understand what the material innovation is, and use that as a starting point for someone with deep sectoral depth, but also someone who's just curious to connect over something that's of mutual interest. So there you're not just designing for that middle 80 or, a certain segment. You're designing for everyone, irrespective of where sort of their awareness of materials lie. So I think parameters such as this have worked well so far. And I think that's something that we continue to practice as we host and as we bring people together.
And that is really interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Mridu. You also maintain a blog where you share your learnings and your opinions. What inspired you to start writing? And how has it shaped your perspective or your professional journey? Is it a personal outlet, or is it more about creating conversations, connecting with others, with the same kind of ideas?
I'm very impressed that you found me in that corner of the internet, just because it's been so dormant for the last a year, a little over a year, and so I really enjoy writing. As something I realized, for me it became another sort of creative outlet, and so I started writing. I also felt like I had some stories to tell, and more in the hope of, when I was doing this, I didn't know who else to speak to or talk to. So I'm hoping that if I was able to share whatever, feelings or experiences I had, then it could help someone else who's also thinking of doing something, different from the norm. So that's why I started. And I think a lot of times I myself, more than anything else, go back to some of those articles and I'm reading them. And, it's almost like my personal archive of learnings and feelings and experiences. But going forward, I definitely do want it to become a medium through which I can connect with more people who have similar interests, and take it, just make it a little more active. That's the first step, but also serve other sort of pursuits, more professional pursuits in the future. And I think how it has shaped me on my journey is, it's made me very grateful, I think, of the different phases of life. I think when you're in the thick of things, you don't really realize the larger picture. And I think by writing, it just makes me appreciate the phase I'm in and what it's bringing, the good and the bad. And good things have come out of it, like this conversation, for example. So
No, we really look forward to the blog becoming active again.
me too.
Yeah. I just want to ask, as a student and a practitioner of design, where do you look to when you're looking for inspiration? Where do you get that from?
So I think if I had to broadly classify it, there are almost two different categories. One is external sources of inspiration, and then there's internal sources of inspiration. So if I'm talking about external source of inspiration, someone I really look up to is Neri Oxman, who is an architect and designer, and she first started her practice out of MIT Media Labs. And she was one of the first people to talk about material ecology. And she really, has this philosophy of working with nature rather than against it, and thinking of nature as your collaborator, and I think as a philosophy, that's something that I really relate with. So a lot of times people like her, especially her, become a source of inspiration. I also think, I really enjoy talking to people, and I often think a lot of great ideas just happen by talking to people, having an open conversation, and it leads to all kind of wonderful ideas. More internally, I mean, I go on a lot of walks, I go on a lot of hikes, and I think that also provides a space for your brain to just be a clean canvas all over again. And and then give your brain some space to basically breathe and think. And sometimes good ideas come from there as well.
That is interesting. That is super interesting. Mridu, for young women listening to this episode, who are just starting out in the fields of sustainability or venture capital, what are the key skills that you think they should nurture or focus on building?
I think more than skills, maybe I'll just talk about mindset, right? Just because that I think has been more helpful as I look back on my own journey. So I think the first thing is, it's really important to be and stay curious. I think if you can continue to nurture that sort of mindset, it can lead to some really wonderful opportunities, but it can also really help you sort of separate the noise and distill and understand what really matters to you, because you're sampling from a larger set. You're finding intersections that are unique to you, or niches that are unique to you. And so I think that journey becomes super important. So curiosity is one big thing. I think the second thing for me, and this is advice I can still use today, So it's sort of like timeless in that sense, is consistency. So for people who are starting out, or who have a big vision and want to know what that first step to take is, I think I've made the mistake previously of doing too many things all at once on day one, and then not being able to really let anything compound, and things just falling off the bandwagon. So one piece of advice is to just be consistent and pick one meaningful thing, and actively and consistently do that, nurture that, and let it sort of go into autopilot. um, that is, yeah, something I'm still working on, but it's definitely a piece of advice I would give others as well.
Right. So, in addition to that, if you could go back in time and give your younger self a piece of advice, what would that be?
Okay, it may sound really trite, because I think growing up we heard this from our parents and other people. When people say be yourself, what does it really mean? I think it's easier said than done, and I think especially when you're young and you're so moldable and you're trying to figure yourself out, find your own feet, it's very easy to become an outcome of your surroundings or environment. But I also think at the same time it becomes very important to start living more authentically, right? If you believe in something that's contrarian, it's okay to voice it. If you feel differently, it's okay to feel that way. And I think it's hard to do that, especially when you're young, but I think the faster you do it, the I mean, it's easier to sort of find what you really love and also be happy, because there's no pretense. And so I think, yeah, just being yourself and being confident about being yourself is super important.
Thank you. I wanted to ask next, what do you think about the future of sustainability-driven entrepreneurs in India, and what's the future of this space look like to you?
Yeah, I mean, sustainability is now almost it's non-negotiable, right? I mean, things are the way they are, and now there's facts and science to back it. So there's no dismissing, there are no theories about it anymore. It is here, it's real, it's at our doorstep. So I definitely think sustainability is going to sort of fall into everything that we do. Is going to become a decision-making lens in every industry at every stage. And so I know that's a very broad question, but at least on the material side, it's almost inevitable, because if you think about it, we live in a physical world. Everything around us is tangible. So material revolution is just, it's going to happen. And so I think the faster we start sort of thinking about it, sort of accepting it, and then working together to solve it, I think the more health related or environmental related challenges we can avoid. So yeah, I think it's going to be everywhere, and everyone's going to have to start thinking about it if they're not already.
Yep. Thank you, Mridu. Before we wrap up, if you could have dinner with any three women, living or historical, who would they be and why?
Okay, that's an interesting question. I think all the three people I would pick are living. So I hope that turns into a reality someday. But the first one going back would be Neri Oxman again, because she's really been a very strong source of inspiration with Terrarium, and just me figuring out who I am. The second one would be Serena Williams, just the pure grit, dedication, her achievements. And the third one would actually be Maria Popova, who is a poet and author, and she runs a website and newsletter called Brain Pickings. And she very beautifully, talks about the intersection of philosophy, literature, art, and science. And although her writing is super dense, it's so well delivered. So I would definitely want to speak to her as well. There are lots of more, but I think yeah.
No, we,
I'll
we
limit
really
my
hope you get to we really hope you get to meet all of these people, and maybe we read about them in your blog. Yeah.
I hope so too.
Yeah. Thank you for speaking to us, Mridhu. Coming to an end of this episode, it was a pleasure speaking to you. And to our audience, we hope that you enjoyed the conversation as much as we did. Do visit Carnegie India's YouTube channel to access all episodes of the Anahita Speaker Series. We thank you, and we'll see you next month.
Firstly, Charukeshi, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and I think a very well curated set of questions, very intentional and deliberate. And in many ways, I also think it offered me the chance to pause and think about some of these questions that you often don't get to unless you're provided with an opportunity like this. So thank you so much again for having me. Thank you so much.